out by telling us a little bit about your spiritual background and which spiritual tradition you tend to identify with most. I know that you write a good bit about Zen Buddhism, but in personal communications that we've had, you don't claim to be a Buddhist. So can you tell us a little about that, first of all?
One of the ways probably to be able to explain who I am spiritually, there's a term, I think it comes from Kierkegaard, about a spiritual agnostic, which is a person who has absolute certainty about a spiritual dimension to life, but does not claim to have any specific knowledge as to what form that deity or that dimension of the divine may take. With that, and that also might be a way of talking about the metaphysical perspective of Buddhism itself. That Buddhism as a religion, it's somewhat ironic that it is even a religion, in that it really does not, in its origins, have any of the theological content that we in the West, coming from a Judeo-Christian orientation, come to expect as and know as theological content. It really does not concern itself with a Godhead. It does not concern itself with an afterlife. And as I am primarily an identify myself, another way of talking about it is, you might say I am a spiritual social scientist. My academic training is in cultural anthropology and clinical psychology, and spent many years practicing as a clinical psychologist, but left that about 10 years ago, that specific identification as a clinical psychologist, to head off into, just as you were kind of struggling a little bit with the introduction, trying to find a way of defining what it is that I do. But what it is that I do is inspired by what I found to be a profound psychological and personally healing perspective contained within Buddhism. That said, what's really important to even understand Buddhism, and I guess what I'm saying in answer to your question is that the spiritual perspective that I most identify with, I don't even know if I could say this, but is Buddhism, because I identify most with Buddhism as a psychology and as a philosophy of life. The perspective of the spiritual perspective of Buddhism, the theological perspective of Buddhism, whatever it does have, emerges out of its origins in Hinduism, and that perspective is best explained, I think, as a fundamental difference from the Western perspective of God as the creator of the world and kind of the big kahuna in charge of everything, to a perspective which says the universe, life, is consciousness itself, and that there was consciousness before form, and that consciousness became form. And God, if you will, is in the consciousness of all form. And so, and one way that people can relate to this, because there's probably many people who are watching this who may have taken a yoga class or a martial arts class, in which the Oriental practice of bowing is typical. Now, and in some yoga classes, and certainly then in meditation classes, like the meditation class I teach, not at UNCA, but public ones, there is a phrase that is often employed, which has both a hand gesture and a word that goes with it, which is namaste, and a little bit of a bow to it.
I've seen that on lots of bumper stickers.
Yeah, and the namaste. I've got a namaste bumper sticker
nice.
myself. And what that means is that the divine that resides within me is recognizing the divine that resides within you. And again, that's where I come back to the agnostic aspect of it, which is, what does that exactly mean? I don't know. What is that divine other than the recognition? And this is it is a recognition of the interconnectedness. It is a recognition that there is one source for life that we are all embedded within. And that what is so important is not to give definition so much to what the nature of that divinity is to realize the implications of when you take an absolutely secularized view of life and remove any sense of divinity from the experience that we have in encountering each other, the experience we have in encountering the animal kingdom, which we are also part of, nature, which we are also part of. It is about that recognition that there is a mystery, and that's the other element that I would probably identify myself as a mystic, one who believes in the mystery and who honors the mystery of the interconnectedness, how we are all embedded within the fabric of life, and that all of life is conscious, and that consciousness needs to be respected, needs to be honored. And what happens with that is a dramatic shift in how we experience ourselves, how we experience others, and how we relate to life. And so, to me, giving definition to my spiritual beliefs, which are coming from many, many cultures. As I said, I was trained as a cultural anthropologist. I'm deeply inspired. I mean, above us is a Native American symbol. There are Native American symbols in this room, all interspersed with symbols from China, from Japan, from Egypt, from even Christian symbols, that there is a universal experience that goes beyond anything that can be thought up. One of the psychologists, the fountainheads of Western psychology, while I have some issues with the way Western psychology is practiced today, there are individuals, and I'm talking about in this case Carl Jung, an immense genius, who brought into Western psychology a perspective that could be described, and as we go on, this may make more sense, a trans-egoic, the importance of the intuitive, the importance of the experience of interconnectedness in a whole, healthy human psyche. And Carl Jung talks about and draws from all these many cultures that there is a fundamental archetypal universal experience from every culture that has ever been of this mystery of origin and the mystery of consciousness and the ability to, not by dissecting the world and examining scientifically what is going on, but rather by trusting that there is a dimension within the human psyche that is a knowing. This would end up being a bit of what Gnosticism is about. Mm-hmm. But Gnosticism tends to give a particular form to what that knowing is. And of course, that's what the word agnostic is about, which is a not knowing, but a spiritual not knowing, acknowledging something is there, but I am not going to assume that from my limited mortal perspective, I could ever be able to say it is this and not that. It is the Christian perspective, or it is the Jewish perspective, or it is the Muslim perspective. It is what is important is that there are all these perspectives, and from a Buddhist perspective, and I think you'll hear figures like the Dalai Lama talking about this, they are all just different cultural perspectives, all pointing toward a single universal experience. And the differences need to be honored, and the differences need to be respected. But there needs to be a recognition that they're all pointing towards something, and what they are pointing towards is something that is ineffable. Which is why I respect very much at the very beginning of the Tao Te Ching, which is the source book of Taoism. You know, one of the teachings is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. The Tao translated basically means the way of nature, the way of the mystery. And again, to try to say that you can say what that is, you can live it, you can experience it, but to be able to reduce it and pinpoint it is an arrogance. And so my spiritual perspective is from that global recognition that there is something in the human experience that needs to be honored, needs to be explored, can be experienced, but to say it is this or it is that, I would not engage in.
You've